If you had one superpower, what would it be?
Gosh, there's so many. Probably to fly. And
Oh,
I mean, I could have said anything, right? But
yeah.
I think I just I'm sick of being on planes. I really
Oh,
am. Just
dude.
airport security and everything else. So I would
Yeah.
love to fly. Not possible. Maybe in our lifetime, but maybe
Yeah.
like a small mini helicopter that looks like a drone. We've seen those in the UAE, right? That
Yeah.
they're testing them.
Yeah.
So maybe, but flying would be my superpower.
That would be really cool. Do you ever have dreams where you're flying? And I feel like I've had these dreams where I've been able to fly in my dream, and then all of a sudden I start falling, and then it's like, no, 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 remind yourself how to fly, and then I jump, and it's almost like these um gravity-less type of atmosphere where I'm just taking these huge jumps, and
Mhm.
like, I don't. Do you ever get that or?
I don't dream a whole lot, but when I do, it's usually falling.
Oh,
And it's just I wake up like in a sweat. I'm like, oh
yeah.
my God, I was
Oh,
falling off
those
a
are the
building
worst.
or
Sure.
probably out of a plane or trying to be Superman and not having,
Mhm.
flying powers and just falling out of the
Mhm.
sky.
Yeah.
Typically it's not the flying part, it's just the falling part. I think
Yeah.
that's fairly common too.
Yeah. I wonder, we've got a whole nother podcast would be the definition of dreams and what they mean, but we won't dive into that. For me, my superpower I think would be to be invisible, not invincible, but invisible. So where
Okay.
people can see me. Like think of Harry Potter and his cloak where he can like sneak around. And I think why I would want that is there are times now I've got two young girls, one just below 4, 1.5 years, where I just need some me time. I was outside. I thought outside was it, but now my kids know how to open the sliding door, but if I just need some, peace and quiet for a second, I put this cloak on, but I don't know.
If your wife was listening, she'd be like, you don't get
Yeah,
you just
that's
don't. It's just
X,
not possible.
X.
I don't get it, you don't get it. And that's true when you have little kids. It
True,
really is.
true. Yeah. Well, hey, everyone, I'm so excited for you to be joining us on another episode of Pros and Cons. I'm here with a really good friend of mine, Nathan. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. So Nathan and I know each other from now I can say my past industry,
Mhm.
working in pro AV, and he was a awesome, I think, leader in the space, just to kind of be really kind to me and share some of just the years of wisdom that he has and tips and trick. We're both like geeking out on the same thing, so I'm really excited to hear and focus on his story today, where he came from, how he ended up to be very successful in what he does today. So let's start with that. Can you just tell us what your role is and what you do today?
So today, I work for Logitech, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Wear different hats. So I primarily have responsibility for three different areas. I run analyst relations for the company, for the B2B group.
Okay.
I also run channel marketing as well as alliance marketing. So kind of a
Amazing.
full plate most of the time, but I wouldn't have it any other way, quite honestly.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a lot to juggle. And by his personality, how he is at work, you would never know this guy has got so many things going on. So he's just very, very humble, very, very solid. But, one of the things I like to do in the show to kind of set the stage is ask this question at the very beginning is when you were a kid and someone asked what you wanted to be when you grew up, how would you have answered that question?
It would have depended on how old I was, but I
All
think
right.
I kind of went through the traditional, I want to be a race car driver, I want to be an astronaut. I know there was definitely an astronaut phase.
Okay.
Based on some of the tragedies, I think I veered to a different direction after that.
Sure.
But, I think it was all the normal, in my culture, like being a doctor is a big deal. And I didn't want anything to do with it. I mean, that was just not an option. So for me, it was always like, I'm going to go into business at some point. I didn't know what. I mean, when you're a child, you really have no idea. But I did go into college for accounting and then realized that accounting was no good for me.
Oh, man.
No offense to accountants and finance folks that we need them, but
Hey.
I was just not good at it.
Yeah.
And luckily for me, I found what I was good at in college. And that happened right after the birth of the internet. Yes, I'm old. But I remember building websites at night just for fun. And I'm kind of like, this is what I dig. I don't want to do accounting. I don't want to get into another auditing class. And that's how I found my way.
If this was a movie, right, or a documentary, and I was really good at film editing, at this point, we'd have like cut film break and it'd be this like rewind, right? And on there'd be this big stubble, but this is how it started. So let's go way back to when you were a kid. Just talk to us a little bit, like, where did you grow up? talk to us a little bit about like early childhood. What was that like
Sure.
growing up as Nathan as a maybe 5, 6 year old?
Sure. So, I was born in Abu Dhabi in UAE. My parents are from India, so I'm still, well, now I'm American, but I used to be Indian at some point. I guess I'm always going to be Indian, but now
Do you have
currently
dual citizenship?
American. Sorry?
Do you have dual
No.
citizenship?
Just
Okay.
US
Okay. Okay.
citizenship today.
hmm
But no, I grew up in the Middle East, and I went to in an Indian school in an Indian community, and it was great growing up there. It was just it was kind of like I call it like Florida now because
Yeah.
it's just so warm, and like there's everything's in English, and it was a great time to be there. For me, it was 70s, 80s, 90s when I grew up.
Okay.
And for me, it was I was never a good student. Honestly, I was terrible.
Really?
Like my
Really?
I remember when I left for college,
Mhm.
everyone was like really worried, including my parents, wondering what I was going to do with my life.
Yeah.
And somehow I figured it out. But no, I was a terrible student. I mean,
Mm.
you'd say someone who's smart, that would not be me. It would never categorize me into that box.
And what do you mean by that? Like attention span? Like you had a short attention span, or
Just
weren't just
academically.
what wasn't in weren't
Yeah,
like
just
didn't click with
academically
group?
I was just, I
Yeah.
didn't, to be honest, after I've learned a lot about myself, and everyone hopefully does
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah.
I just never applied myself, and
Mhm.
it's because I wasn't interested, and I
Interesting.
just had no interest. I would dive into things that and by the way, this is kind of like how I am today too, but I
Yeah.
would dive into things I really, really care about and ignore
Yeah.
the rest.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how you figure out what you're good at. And then
Mhm.
it's okay to give up if you're not going to be interested in it,
Yeah.
but then go do something else, right? It's when you completely give up, it can get somewhat challenging. But I was not good academically. Now, I did have some mishaps in my education where I did very poorly. And I woke up one day and said, I need to fix this. And I need to just start trying. Forget about
Mhm.
becoming the best, right? People like to become the best. I don't think
Yeah.
I'm the best at anything. I think I'm kind of master of none on everything. But there's also value in that,
Yeah.
right? So there's a big value in being able to have a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And for me, I just said, I'm going to try. And I tried, and my trials were actually pretty good.
Mm.
And I got ahead and ended up going to college, and actually did something with my life, which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
I think that's really interesting. Two things I want to dive into that you brought up earlier is your parents had this high expectation or I would say it sounds like they had a high expectation, and then
Mhm.
culturally, like doctors were a big deal. And I want to pick that apart a little bit because academically, right? We are aligned in an education system that it's like you have to do good in school in order to progress to the next level. And so these were two things kind of that you're dealing with as a adolescent of like, gosh, the expectation of what's around me is like doctor, high paying medical field job. And I think a lot of us are faced with that because we're not exposed to what's out there. Talk to me a little bit about maybe that cultural, like, why do you think that is like in your culture that that everyone is doctors, or that we look to that as being a metric of success?
I think just being financially stable. I don't think the intent was always to be super rich and drive Lamborghinis and stuff like
Sure.
that. It was always the hope for every parent, I think, was like to go do something with your life. And
Yeah.
being a doctor or a lawyer, an engineer,
hmm
those were all high stakes types jobs where you knew you would do financially well and you could make a living for yourself and have a family.
Mm.
But I think in general, we over-index on that, right? So so like if you think about my class, which is a little bit different than high school here, but there, when you go to 11th grade, you pick a path, and there's only 3
Oh,
paths.
cool. Interesting.
There's science, which would be doctor, scientist, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. There's commerce, which is what I did.
Mhm.
And then the 2 or 3 people left, and I'm not joking, get into arts. And that's literally a
Wow.
blanket for everything else.
Whoa. Interesting.
Theater, commercial art, all those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And everyone just kind of pushes their hardest to get their kids into the science batch. We call them batches of people. And
Mhm.
there's only so many seats in a class. So you go by your points. Like if you score really high in your 10th grade exams,
Mhm.
you make it to the science batch. And then pretty much everyone else spills over, again, me, into the commerce batch. And then the few that really wanted to do arts go. In my batch, we didn't even have anyone in arts. Previous years, we did.
Yeah.
And it just kind of shows you how the warping of kind of your focus needs to be
Mhm.
based on being successful. And by the way, not everyone is successful that made it into science.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's this false promise in a way. In a way, I do actually like parents pushing that hard.
Yeah.
Because you learn something about yourself. In essence, you learn whether you're going to be good at that or you want to go somewhere else. I did commerce honestly, because I was really good at accounting. I really was. I was fantastic at it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had friends that were already in the US that
Mm-hmm.
were majoring in accounting. And I'm like, I looked at them up as like a big brother. And I'm like, I want to be
Mm-hmm.
like that guy. That's what I want to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course, fast forward 3 years and I'm sitting in my auditing class. I'm like, there's
Like,
no way.
this is
I
not for
can't do
me.
this. It's not
Well,
me.
so what was the shift then? I mean, if you were good at it and you talked earlier about, applying yourself, or you tend to lean towards things that you just find interesting. What do you think was the shift, or what was that realization of like, nah, this ain't for me?
I think it's because I was introduced to something else. I was, staying up late at night, building websites. I mean, the accounting was fine. I wasn't failing or anything. I was doing okay, but I wasn't
Mhm.
an A student either.
Mhm.
So that was kind of like a B student. I'm like, I'm not the best at my game.
Mm.
But then when I was spending all night in the labs,
Mhm.
building HTML websites, and gosh, I'm sounding really old now, and stuff like that, I was just passionate about it. I really wanted to learn more. I would spend hours at the library reading books, just trying to figure out how the internet would work, or what, worked
Mhm.
at the time,
Mhm.
which was mysterious. It's still a mystery to many people, actually.
Yeah.
So I think that was the turning point for me. I'm like, why would I do this for a
Yeah.
living when I'm
Yeah.
miserable at it? And
Mhm.
Jeff, I'm lucky. There are many that did not have that gift. It was a gift for me to figure that out.
Mhm.
And the rest is history. I went right into consulting right after I graduated, got
Like
into tech.
consulting for websites, or consulting
No,
for
actually,
tech?
the time I graduated, it was right
Mhm.
around where everyone was learning COBOL, because the year 2000, everything was going to crash, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Right.
And I was forced to take COBOL, which was, wow. Thank God I don't have to do that anymore.
Mhm.
Um, but everyone I graduated with was doing COBOL, advanced COBOL even. So because they wanted a Y2K job, I'm like, what happens after Y2K?
Mhm.
I'm not going
Mhm.
to have a job. Like, no
Mhm.
one's going to run COBOL anymore.
Mhm.
So I kind of basically figured, okay, this Windows NT thing, remember that? Windows NT was very popular. A lot of customers were adopting it, building it in. So I actually got my MCSE before I even graduated college in
Oh, wow.
98.
Wow.
Which was fairly rare at the time. I mean, no one else was doing it. I'm like, I'm going to do that. So I wanted to be unique, right? So when I
Mhm.
got a job, I had multiple offers available, and that actually did happen.
Mhm.
And I went straight into tech consulting. So I went into doing, Windows NT networks,
Oh, geez.
migrating them. Eventually I learned Exchange along the way, a little SQL, a project server. So I was very much a Microsoft head, in my first decade of consulting and engineering.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pause for the audience, right? Because if you're listening to this and you're not in tech, you're like, "Oh, this guy's a genius." Like, yeah, like,
No.
like they could easily get lost. But I think there is some genius, and I want to pick it out, because you're saying some really cool things. I heard earlier you say that you were blessed with the gift to realize that you're going to move on from something that you weren't passionate about. And I think that's really at the heart of what this podcast is about, is identifying, like, how did people end up where they were. And so not only did you realize this in school, and I wanted to pick that apart so bad, on how you were this outside thinker, being forced to stay in a lane, and then realizing, okay, in order to be successful, I have to stay in this lane. But getting back to just what you're saying in this shift from accounting into tech, um, you know, was there a map, like, in your mind, where you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go and get my you know credentials that will allow me to do, like, it that was a very, like, concise, oh, I went and did this, and all these dominoes played in effect. But for the people out there listening, like, what did that look like for you as far as process? Did you know what you're doing, or really was it just kind of like, I know I'm into this and I'm gonna figure it out?
I would be lying if I told you there was a solid plan.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, listen, I was 19, 20 years old.
Mm.
I was barely, you'd laugh if you find out the stuff that I was doing tech wise in college, because it was literally like plugging stuff in without realizing, things actually going to work.
Mm.
But, I had a plan to get my MCSE. That was my stretch goal. I was going to be like, hey, I'll get a couple of Windows NT server tests. That should have been enough for me to get a job. But I'm like, no, I'm going to go up and get my MCSE. Because no one else is doing it.
And break that down for the audience, so that anyone who
sure.
doesn't know what that is.
So back in the day, when you wanted to get into Microsoft Windows NT server-side certification, there was a group of certifications that kind of bundled into one certification, which was called the MCSE, Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. I don't think that exists anymore. I think they've got a different derivative of that now. But you had to take like 5 or 6 fairly tough exams. You had to go to a Sylvan Learning Center. Remember that? We'd go into a center. You'd have like
Everything was
30
in
minutes or
person.
40
Yeah.
minutes to complete. So I basically went to the only bookstore in town. I was in Terre Haute, Indiana, Walden Books at the mall.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically bought all those MCSE books. And for me, like tech
Dang.
manuals, man, I can read that stuff inside out, like in
Dang.
a couple hours.
Yeah.
So I would learn. I had my own little server in my college dorm room. I'd
Mm-hmm.
learn, basically like set up servers and like all this stuff, this techie stuff to figure it out, to learn it. So I was like learning it to take the test, but also learning it to learn it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was basically two different reasons. And I just started taking the tests and I failed some of them. In fact, I failed the web server test, which is ironic because that was the only thing I actually knew.
Right.
But everything else I passed. And, right before I graduated, I think 6 months before I got my MCSE, no one else in my class had it. And, that was my plan. I was hoping that, companies would like it. I mean, I knew they wanted someone with that credential. But it's hard when you graduate from college with not much experience. I mean, I was working at the labs. I was working in a server farm, like in the School of Business. But those aren't like large data centers, right? Like we have today. But they were willing to take a chance on me. And, I learned a lot on the job post that. But that was the plan. It's like, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And I hope those things work. Yeah,
just kind of, I wouldn't say roll the dice, but strategically like say, hey, this dice has only 3 numbers, not 6. And, it's my certificate, my college degree, and my intuition that this is what I want to do. So let's see what happens. So I love that. And you get into consulting. It obviously ends up being a success for you, right?
Yeah, it was pretty good. I kind of did it till like a couple years. It wasn't very long until, we had the .com crash and everyone was running out of jobs. No one was spending any money. I ended up starting my own consulting company and I did that for about solid 10 months. It was fantastic. It was great. I learned QuickBooks and basically learned everything. And by the way, just I'm sure the accounting minor helped in that.
Yeah.
Just, trying to figure out the books and stuff like that.
But didn't go unwasted.
Didn't go unwasted. But the fun part for me the realization was I didn't want to be by myself.
Yeah.
It just drove me nuts. It was fun when, like I had my own hours and I basically had servers sitting on my couch, which my wife hated, by the way. So at some point I'm like, I need to go work for a company. And one of the gentlemen that I was working for as a consultant, he's like, listen, you either come on full time or you go work for this other company. And he mentioned this company called Burby that I'd never heard of. And I'm like, what's a Burby? And he's just like, oh, this is an amazing place. And Jeff, I'm going to share this story because I think it's just funny. He basically says, you don't understand. This company is so advanced. They actually have data sheets on a SharePoint site where sellers want something. They can just print the Microsoft SharePoint data sheet and give it to their customer. It's mind blowing. I mean, just think about where
we are today with that.
Yeah,
right?
where we are today. And I ended up going to that company. That company ended up getting bought by CDW. And that was my 17 years in the industry at CDW.
Wow. That's great. So you took a risk. Was it a risk for you at the time? Was that a risk for you to jump over to that company, or?
Because I had no idea who they were.
Yeah.
I had only met the one person I talked to. And it was a leap of faith. And I will tell you, I've taken many of them, sometimes fairly blind into, I don't know what I'm going to run into. And some have not been good. But the key thing with all of them on anything you do or take or any project you take on is you got to learn something from it. You learn something about yourself. You learn something about maybe I don't want to work with that person anymore. I don't want to do this kind of job anymore. But you got to key into the learning moment because some of these are really frustrating. You can get very discouraged and you'll want to quit. And you might quit, right? But learn something from it. I think that's for me in every situation that I've been in, especially the frustrating ones. I've always learned something. I look back on it. At the time when I'm frustrated, right? You can't like say, hey, I'm going to learn something from this.
Yeah.
But when you reflect, which is really important, I think, you've got to learn something from it. And you learn something about yourself.
It's such a good perspective to have, I think, because a lot of times what can set people back is a perspective of negativity. Like, man, I took the risk. It didn't go my way. And they get stuck in this rut of not being able to move past, whatever the effects were from maybe what they feel is a bad decision. So I think we're very similar in that I'm always trying to find the good in something, or what did I learn? What can I pull out of this to apply to the next situation? And It's such a great takeaway. So if you're taking notes, which you're not, you're probably using AI, but AI clip this moment right here because it's a good one. Really good nugget there. So 17 years at CDW, which is, I think, a fantastic career in itself. Unheard of. I'll just be real. Like for my generation to be at anything longer than 5 or 6 years, like 5 or 6 years at a company today is like really long. So what kept you at a job for 17 years? Like I think this is such a cool question because we don't see it a lot. So yeah, talk to me a little bit about that career path.
I think so. There's multiple things for me.
Mhm.
I think I had like 8 or 9 different jobs when I was at CDW, and they were not all in the same area, which was
Mhm.
fantastic. So they really gave you the opportunity, if you wanted to learn, if you're passionate about a different area, just throw you into it, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Some of them I didn't want to do, quite frankly, and but I learned a lot from it. Some I didn't like, some I liked, but you know what? You can't like everything. It's just not realistic,
Mm.
especially if you're trying to learn something hard. I started as an engineer. I moved on to a pre-sales role, an advisor role. I went into corporate strategy and helped
Wow.
build the next, 3-year plan for the company. I then moved into an executive role, ran the collaboration business with like 120 people, I think, at some point.
Wow. Wow.
So, I've had some really good roles at CDW, but ultimately it's the people.
Mm.
Right, the people kept me there. The people
Mhm.
kept me challenged. They kept me passionate about
Mhm.
what I wanted to do. And when I went sideways, they were like, "Let's realign you." Right. So maybe you should go into sales. Maybe you should go
Mhm.
into marketing. Maybe you
Mhm.
should. And I took most of those risks. And
Yeah.
even though it seemed risky and somewhat painful at the time,
Mhm.
I always seemed to come out on top. And if I didn't
Yeah.
come out on top, I reassessed and kind of moved on to another role that was better for me.
That's really
So
cool.
that's what kept me there. And, they really gave me this canvas to kind of be myself and learn. And that's so important, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a huge. I think I'm hearing more of that at companies who are ranking really high as attaining workers and having a great culture. Are they are opening doors of opportunity for you to, you've been in your role for 3 years, and we're seeing that you're the word you used was sideways. You're there's no movement. Is there something else you want to do? Like giving folks an opportunity, or like, hey, internally, like socializing new jobs that pop up. Have you ever been interested in like really encouraging internal uh, applicants to apply for new opportunities? And that's really cool. And I think something that not a lot of companies do today. They kind of get you in a role and you get stuck there. And I think that's why there is a lot of movement amongst my generation.
I will tell you, this is a work cultural thing where you have to create the opportunities for your people.
Mm-hmm.
There's also it's a personal thing as well. If you're not willing to stick your neck out, if you're not going to go ask and push people to like move you around,
Yeah.
nothing's going to happen. Right. So
I,
I've never expected someone to give me something. This is a very different perspective that I've heard lately
mm,
is, just because you got an MBA, we're not going to promote you. I've heard that so many times. Hey, I got my MBA. Give me a promotion. I was like, no, like I
yeah.
didn't ask you to do that. Right. I mean, great for you, great
Yeah.
accomplishment, but that's not how the world works.
Sure.
So I think you have to do both ways. I think there has to be a culture of acceptance and being
Mhm.
able to push your people to give them opportunities to learn. But I
Sure.
also think on the other side, you need to have some sort of curiosity and
Mhm.
an ambition really to kind of push yourself forward. One project, I just thought about it.
Mhm.
This, I don't know how many years ago, probably 20 years ago, where my boss is like, hey, the CEO really wants us to figure out big data. This is when big data became a buzzword really quickly. And no
Mhm.
one knew what that meant. They just thought it was these big servers that have hard drives in them. That's all it means. And he's like, hey, can you work with the strategy team? And I'm
Mhm.
like, sure. I mean, I'd love to learn. And it was a great experience because we're doing a lot of research. We're brainstorming together, trying to figure out like, do we need new partners? How do we enhance our services and manage services to kind of build the offerings for our customers? And that's how I got into corporate strategy. If I'd never taken that project on, I would have
Sure.
never learned anything about M&A and any of this stuff.
Mhm.
So like, it's like these little daisy chain effects of making decisions that
Mhm.
help you, kind of get you network with people. And these are friends that I'll keep forever, right?
Yeah.
So you network with these great people, but then they take chances on you later on if your skill set matches
Right.
what they want.
Yeah.
And one of the things, it's funny because I remember in corporate strategy, the way I positioned it is I'm like, hey, listen, you kind of need someone that knows technology in corporate strategy. Otherwise, you're making these strategic decisions without thinking about the tech. And they're like, you're right. Next thing you know, I was in the corporate strategy team. So those are the side projects. And Jeff, I've done hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Hundreds of them, and all these weird like integration, like database integration, website moving, and I've even moved data centers, which is just a whole nother ballgame. But that's how you meet people. That's how you learn.
Yeah. And
so a lot of experimentation for myself.
I was going to ask you, I was like, can you give some examples of what that means? But you gave two really great examples right there of what that looks like to step outside of your comfort zone, step outside of your role, and really say, hey, I have an idea, or have you thought about this? I think asking questions is a theme that I hear from a lot of guests on the show. It's just they sticking their neck out and not afraid to ask the questions that, why wouldn't you? Have you thought of this? Because everybody is, we're all normal people, and we can't think of it all. And if you have great insight to be able to offer some type of skill or talent into a decision, especially like corporate strategy, you could definitely be the missing pillar that they're looking for. So I love that.
There's no actual guide for this, right? There's no guide. You're like, you fall into the opportunity sometimes. I remember my first job out of college. This is the one after I had my MCSE, they brought me on. And I was basically supposed to be doing Windows NT work, Exchange work, right? All of a sudden, this customer calls, and it's a small business customer, says, hey, we bought this thermal printer from you. It was a Zebra, by the way. And we don't know why it's not spitting labels out. And I'm like, I have no idea how a thermal printer works. I have no idea. I'm literally, probably a couple hours later, I was on the factory floor, on all fours, basically opening up a thermal printer, trying to figure out how to fix this thing.
Wow.
I did fix it. But I don't know how many hours I spent on that thing. Yeah. But, it's just like, it's just kind of, I don't know if I have grit necessarily. I don't know if that's like too strong a word for me. But it's just like, you do whatever it takes to make it work, right? And you have a happy customer, and people recognize that.
Yeah, they do.
But those are like the weird, like going to dirty closets, pulling cable, fiber optics, splicing fiber. Like I've done all of that. And as I reflect, if I hadn't done all those projects in my first 10 years, I mean, I helped build the IT plan for the Future Farmers of America organization at 22.
Oh my God.
Right? I didn't do it myself. I had a whole team working for me.
Of course.
I evaluated an ERP installation. I mean, these random things that I would just figure out on the weekend. And I remember some of my first Citrix projects. Remember Citrix? I think they're still around. Citrix projects where literally I bought Brian Madden, if you know him, like Brian Madden's book on Citrix, learned it over the weekend, and then went and deployed it the following week, right? I mean, that's the life of a consultant. You have to think on your feet. So not that I'm an expert in any of those things today, by the way, or even at the time, but it really helps fill in the gaps of how a business works. How does finance work? How does M&A work? What do people care about? How do employee plans work? Like it really helps you so when you get to a corporate strategy job and you fill in the gaps, then every job you take, you get better and better and better at it.
I mean, you have so much exposure already at that time by, like you said, learning and being willing to learn. And I think that's really good too. It's another good takeaway is you sounds like you've been constantly learning and not afraid to learn new things in order to, to benefit the people, the people being customers at the time or, the folks you're working for. So amazing. We were talking about 17 years at CDW. I'd love to get into where you are today and talk a little bit about Logitech because you're doing some amazing things there. But I want to just say, for those, who are loyalists, who have been at the companies that they love for a long time, things are going great. We've had these fantastic careers. Talk a little bit, and I know I don't think you went from CDW to Logitech. So was there anything in between?
No, I did.
No, you did. You did.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. That's great because it sets this up nicely. What were like the considerations to take another leap, another, if you would, risk going to a company that you've never worked for before? You've definitely heard about them and I think knew about it, but I think this is really good. This is a good question. I'm selfishly asking for myself because there will be a day when, where I'll absolutely love a company and there's just another opportunity. So maybe talk about that transition into Logitech.
So look at it as two different ways. There's the realizing that you want to do something else and leave,
Mm-hmm.
which was very hard for me, by the way. After 17 years, you can imagine that last day was very emotional for me and all my entire team. But then there's also the other aspect of where do you want to go and how do you know, right? So for me, I've always wanted to work for a manufacturer. That was always my dream job. Actually, I always wanted to work for Apple, but that hasn't really happened yet. And that probably never will. But, for the right position. But I looked at my career and I'm like, okay, I've done all these great things, but I'd like to have some sort of thumb or hand in building something that affects the entire world positively, right?
That's cool.
Logitech's already there, right? They already have the amount of things that we make that affect an end user's day, the mouse they use, the keyboard they use, the camera system. I'm on a Mevo Core right now, recording right now. I think you are too. We affect so many people in so many different ways. And I'm like, I'm just missing that. We do that at scale at CDW, but we don't make anything, right? So for me, it was like, there's value in obviously reselling. I did it for such a long time, but I wanted to affect someone differently. I wanted to affect design. I wanted to affect the building of a product. I'm like, man, even though if I might not make something myself, but I want to be a part of something. It's just exciting to me. So that was my defining moment to leave, and why, I left during the pandemic, right in the middle of it.
Oh, wow.
I just felt like that was the right time. My team was working well. They were doing really well. The pandemic, obviously a lot of business happening during the pandemic. I'm like, it just seems like the right time to jump. And the only people I called were Logitech. Actually, I didn't call anyone else. I called the GM at the time. I knew him because, again, we did so much. I was in such a great position at CDW because I knew all the CEOs of all our partners, or their GMs, or their directors of design, or whatever it was. And Scott Wharton, who you know well.
Yep.
I called Scott. I'm like, Scott, this is something I want to do. Like, can we consider it? And he's like, hey, let's talk. Let's think about it, right? And as we went back and forth, I talked to Simon Dudley, who was my boss for a while. Simon well. And we said, yeah, we would love your experience. You've got channel, you've got M&A, you've got all these things that can be very valuable. And I came along to Logitech and then ended up running analyst relations, which I did for 3 years. I'm still doing it today, but now I just have more roles.
Yeah.
And that was my bridge. And by the way, at the time, for me, there were so many companies. And now there's more. There are way more in the VC space. But I just felt like they had it all figured out. They were not going too high on the high end of really expensive video systems. They figured out the small business. They figured out the medium, and they just were starting to launch Rally Bar Mini, which the entire market has moved to already. Right? We knew that was going to happen. It was just going to be a matter of time.
Sure.
And Logitech's actually done it very quickly. And I'm like, I don't know where else I'd go. I don't know why I would go into any of the other competitors out there.
Yeah.
So it was a leap of faith again. But I also had a friend. I had Scott. I had Simon. I already knew both those folks. I knew how they work. Very open-minded, very passionate. I knew they would push me. I knew I would learn a lot. And I also knew I would get access to the things I needed to do to learn. And honestly, my first week, I believe I was on a leadership meeting, my first week on the job. And that's the amount of confidence they had.
Yeah.
But it's also the opportunity. Like, who gives you that opportunity on your first week?
Yeah, that's
right. Just amazing.
That's the power of, I'm hearing several things, and what you're saying is just the power of networking and having good relationship. Also, with 17 years experience somewhere, moving to a new company is a huge risk. I mean, you're leaving relationships, something you're familiar with. So turning to somebody you can trust at that time, which was the relationship in Scott and Simon. And then the other thing was being aligned to something that you're passionate about, which was some type of social impact, meaning you are building things that people are using. And it's actually one of the things that I absolutely loved at Logitech too, was Scott was huge on this, is that we weren't just making video products because that's what we made. Scott was very passionate about changing the world and, having people meet over video before that was even a thing. Like pre-pandemic, we were having work from home week where we were lucky to get 30 companies around the US to be a part of this. And it was truly because he believed, like, by doing so, we're, saving carbon emissions, which is a huge story just in what you all have accomplished at Logitech. And so you aligned with the right person who aligned with what you were passionate as well, which was that social responsibility aspect. And so, man, I love that. And those are like three things I just picked out of what you said. And it's good because I think there's a lot of us out there that are scared to leave one place, not knowing what could be next. So there is risk involved, but there is some mitigated risk, or like thinking through it and not just taking a blind leap. So I love that. I really do. Cool. So you've done some amazing things at Logitech, right? How long have you been there now?
3.5 years.
I would have never guessed 3.5. I'd be like, man, this guy's been there for almost like 7-10 years. Just the amount of impact that it's made in the short time is crazy.
Sometimes it feels like it's been 5 or 6 years because there's been so much we've done, right? There's been every product launch we've done since the pandemic. I've lost count of how many products that we've done, but the teams are just solid, right? They're just so focused and good people. We get a lot of great feedback from customers too. And that's going to really help shape our products.
Yeah.
Because, we build it for X, and then sometimes you're like, it should have had this or should have had that. And we get all that feedback from customers. So that's the best part about this job, is that we have all the systems that people can give us feedback through our software, through just word of mouth, sometimes through our sellers. So we're constantly trying to evolve and make it better. And probably the biggest change I've seen at Logitech is the fact that we've gone from, I don't know, a few mice and keyboards that were made sustainably to over 2/3, like over 75% now, I think.
Amazing.
All our products are made with recycled materials, which is insane. I don't know anyone else who's doing that today.
No.
And it's taken us almost 8 years to get here. It's an 8-year process to get here. And it's not just, PCR plastics or post-consumer recyclable plastics. It's recycled fabrics. It's low carbon aluminum. It's recycled packaging. So we're not just doing one thing, right? We're doing a lot of different things. And probably the newest thing for us that I'm really actually proud of is the repairability. So now we're allowing people to say, hey, listen, buy a product from us. You can replace the battery yourself, and there's an iFixit partnership that we have. I'll send you the little mini screwdrivers that you need. And then with our Select program, we're actually collecting and recycling now too. So if someone has old gear, whether it's ours or someone else's, that's crazy, which we take back other people's stuff, we properly recycle it, and then give the customer back a certificate to know that it was disposed of properly and recycled. So they can then count that towards the KPI. So there's just, these teams are amazing. They're all super passionate about what
innovative.
they do.
Innovative.
It's I'm in awe most days. It's just freaking amazing.
So it's safe to say you love what you do?
I do. I can tell.
If I were to ask you it's hard because I'm going to say, what's the one thing you love about your job? But I'm going to ask it. So I'm going to give you some fluff here to think about it. But you've got multiple roles. You've been there for 3.5 years. You're doing incredible things, from environmental to the way people are using your equipment and how that's just helping folks, carpal tunnel, mice, keyboards, accessibility for cameras and audio and AI. What's the one thing that you love about your job?
It's going to sound like I'm going to say something like I thrive on chaos, and that's not it.
Okay.
But I love the dynamic nature of the job. It's just every day is completely different. Yes, there's things you need to get done. But as I look back, almost all my roles over the last decade have been like this. They're just very, very different. Sure, you have some one-on-ones and some calls that repeat every month or something like that. But everything else is different. Every day is a different. Every day is a winding road. Yeah, maybe that's appropriate, but in a good way.
Yeah.
And I like that. I really like the fact that it changes and it's not the same old every single day. That drives me nuts.
Yeah.
I've only worked in an office 5 days a week. 2 years of my entire career. I was actually crazy. 4 days. It wasn't a full 5 days. So I've never really been in an office 40 hours a week.
Wow.
Because I was a consultant. So I was always on the road, flight, and then
traveling,
pre-sales engineer, manager. And then I've been remote for, 16, 17 years. So even pre-pandemic. So this office was built. So everyone's like, my gosh, how'd you get this office? I'm like, I built it to work at home 15 years ago. Actually, that's not true. I moved here in 2018. So it's been 8 years or so, right?
It's an amazing space.
My wife's like, I'm done. There's no more space. You've already taken the entire floor.
I thought I was stepping my office game up, but after seeing you, it's all about lights and camera now. So the next time we talk on a podcast, I'm gonna be lit. That's
And
what
I'm not a lighting genius, right? I just like a lot of YouTube watching. Patrick Kelly's been great at like
no, we've
sharing a
heard
lot
through
of
your
his.
story, you're just diving in and figuring it out. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna dive in and figure it out too.
yeah. That's all I've done. Is just
Yeah.
plug in a lot of stuff in, break a lot of things. Try to
You say
figure out. But
Patrick
lighting is the
Kelly?
hardest by far.
Patrick Kelly has a good
He does. Yeah.
tutorial on it. Yeah. Shout out to him. Yeah. So okay. We're landing the plane here. I always love to ask this question to the guests on the show is there's been so much wisdom and advice like through this. So it's needless to say, someone's walking away with something. But if you were to give a piece of advice to somebody listening who is interested in what it is that you do, so you talked analyst relations, you talked channel marketing, alliance marketing, and they're looking to get into one of these roles, what would be that advice that you'd give the listener who is interested in, kind of stepping in that kind of role?
So I would say not just for any of those three, but I'd say any role that you want to go. And I'll go a little wider, right?
All right. I love it.
Participate, join a BRG, ERG kind of group, get to network with people. And I have a lot of people that actually at Logitech right now that, for example, may want to learn branding, right? And they're taking they're doing projects with the branding team. We're allowing them to spend like 10 hours a week or something like that.
That's cool.
Take those chances to learn and get involved. I like reading a book, sure, of course, but you're not going to get experience unless you do it.
Yeah.
So any job, if it's channel marketing, alliance marketing, engineering, go try to do a side project where you can actually get some experience, meet some people, network with them. That kind of helps you pave your way into doing a much larger role. Maybe that becomes into a residency or an actual job later on, right? Now, it's easy to say. So everyone who's listening is like, oh, my work doesn't let me do that. That's true. That is a problem. And this is what I'm saying. This is a two-sided issue, right?
Yeah.
And it's the culture of the company. If they're not going to let you do it, you're going to have to go somewhere else to find it. I hate to say that, especially in this economy. Please, for God's sake, don't quit your job right now.
Yeah.
But that in a normal economy, I'd say that would be the advice, right? Just go find something that you're actually passionate about in a culture that'll help you do it.
Yeah.
But then there's also the other side, which is you need to be curious. You need to push, right? You need to like say, hey, I raise my hand for things that maybe you don't even want to do.
Sure.
And I'll be honest, I didn't volunteer for a lot of them, right? But eventually I'm like, that's sort of interesting. Yeah, I might be miserable for a couple of months, but I'll learn a lot. And every single time I learned a lot. So to me, take some risks, raise your hand, push people to like include you into things.
So
and
good.
if your culture doesn't support it, you're in the wrong place. That's just the truth.
It's very good. That's such good advice, man. Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the beginning, I asked you what you, if you had one superpower, what would it be? You said flying, and I think you are flying, Nathan. I think you have an amazing story of how you got to where you were, and if you can look at this like a metaphor, I think flying is doing the impossible. And I think that when I see you at shows, and if you're in the AV space and you see this guy, he's got a full one-man production team, which is phenomenal and great. But I think where he's doing the impossible is he's doing what he loves to do. And a lot of people see that as an impossibility. And it's one of the passions of why I started the show. So man, just, congrats to you. Continue to fly, continue to do the things that you think you can't by raising your hand and, stepping outside of the box. And for all those listening, it is possible to end up in a spot that you absolutely love and enjoy. And Nathan is a testament to that. So
thanks, man. Thanks for being you too. I mean, you're so great to work with on every project. You're always positive, the beacon of light. So I think we probably have that in common, right? So just thank you for being you and having me on the show. It's always great to share my perspective.
It's a pleasure. And we didn't even jump into it, but like shameless plug for myself, because I got to hear some of it. You are very musicianally engaged as well. So not only can he code, build websites, and run cross global teams, the guy can get down on a couple guitars and piano. So plug your band, man, if people want to check that out.
Yeah, so it's a dad band, and it's funny how we started. We literally started just for like I grabbed some people from CDW. I'm like, hey, let's jam in a band.
Yeah,
and we did a charity event, and then my boss at the time joined, and then he left CDW. I left CDW. We're like, hey, let's just start another band. And in the span of me struggling to figure out what to call the band, I ended up calling it. So I'm a big Austin Powers fan. I love slapstick comedy. So that's just my thing.
Love Austin Powers.
I mean, it's very common for well,
Yeah.
But no, I called it "Daddy Wasn't There," which is the opening song in the third movie.
My mom loved that song, by the way. Like,
did you? Yeah,
her jam.
so great. So I'm like, no one's gonna get it. And honestly, 80% of the people, they're like, "Why is it called Daddy Wasn't There?" It doesn't make sense, but they remember it. So I'm like, you know what? It's double meaning. It's fine. Whatever.
Perfect.
So we play in the Chicagoland area. I don't have a whole lot of time because, as you know, I'm on the road all the time.
Yeah.
And the band members hate me for that, but it is what it is. They find other people to play with. But I do all the sound. I do all the lighting.
Of course you do.
I do a lot of it.
The guy's got a cage underneath his desk. So imagine.
I like things that blink. This is my weakness. I love gadgets, and I've been blessed in my career to get a lot of gadgets.
That's cool.
And personal, obviously, as well. So I'm a gadget guy. I always have been. They called me that when I was a kid. But for me, it's like blinky lights. I just love it. I dig it. But for me, it's like we play around. So yeah, you can check out Daddy Wasn't There on our Facebook page.
Awesome.
Check out some of our clips. And if you're in the Chicagoland area, we'd love to have you. Yeah,
go support. Follow Nathan on LinkedIn if you're not. Thank you so much for being on Pros and Cons. This has been one of my favorite episodes. So I appreciate you, man. And till next time, thank you for tuning in. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Nathan is here to ask. So drop a comment, reach out to him. He's a great guy and an amazing person to follow.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right. See ya.